Everyone, thank you for coming. I know we do have other people that'll be joining here as we begin the session, but thank you for coming. This is a webinar hosted by the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium, and it's part of our educational and outreach effort to make our partners aware of the various types of funding mechanisms that are available for spinal cord injury research. And one of them that is beloved to us is the SCIRP program through the DoD and CDMRP, which we'll talk about specifically today. So I'm Jen French. I'm the current president of the North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium. We are an organization that was founded in 2018, and we focus on care, cure, and policy and research as well in terms of making a collective effort around North America. And membership is free to our organization. If you are interested, you can go on our website, complete an application. So even though you might not be a person living with spinal cord injury or a nonprofit that represents a person with spinal cord injury, we do have a classification of memberships as partner members. So either you as your institution or your organization can join, or you as an individual can join as well and tap into our resources and our various efforts that we do in terms of really bringing together all of the stakeholders within spinal cord injury. So you are, of course, welcome to go to our site. We also want to let everybody know that this month we did the worldwide launch of the SCI Research Advocacy course that is now available for free on our website. It is a free online course to learn about the research process. And for those of you that are in research for spinal cord injury, you can also learn about what it's like to live with a spinal cord injury, because some of those needs to knows about spinal cord injury and living with it. So we have modules specifically for researchers in that area. So again, it is a free course. You can go online and sign up for it, and it's self-paced. So you don't have a deadline to complete it, but you do get a certificate of completion when you are done. So please feel free to go online and join that, but not during this session. We want you to stay here and listen to the important information that we have to share to you. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Melissa Miller. She is the program director for the DoD CDMRP, which is the congressionally mandated research program that is specific for spinal cord injury. There is a new call out, a new announcement just recently went out for their funding cycle, and she is going to talk about that today. This is your open window to ask her questions. So we're going to talk a little bit about the program, how she has it, how it is set up, their research and review process, where their focus areas are. And we're going to go into at the end a little bit about, engagement programs, because some of them are required within this funding mechanism. So with no further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Melissa Miller. Take it forward, Melissa.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my slides. Awesome. And as Jen said, this is an opportunity to have a conversation about SCIRP and where we are within the research and development continuum and how we fund science. I encourage you to add your questions to the chat. And then we can call out those questions after I'm finished. We'll just run through this quite quickly. So first, I want to thank Jen for allowing me to speak about this this really important research program, and it's doing some really unique things, I think, in the spinal cord injury field that other funders might not necessarily be able to because of how they're established. So first off, the SCIRP program is part of the congressionally directed medical research programs, which I'll henceforth refer to as CDMRP. And we are located within the Department of Defense. So when people think about us, sometimes they will refer to us as just the DoD, but the DoD is a huge organization, and we're only one office within its infrastructure that implements and manages funding for biomedical research programs. Overall, our aim at CDMRP is to transform healthcare through innovative and impactful research. And we do that through responsibly managing research that discovers, develops, and delivers healthcare solutions for service members, veterans, and the American public. So before we get into specifics about the spinal cord injury research program within CDMRP, I want to touch upon some hallmarks of all CDMRP research programs that are good for you to be aware of if you're considering applying for CDMRP funding. First, research funds are added to CDMRP programs annually and therefore are subject to change each year. So it's common for programs to fall off of our list, new programs to be incorporated, and for funding levels to fluctuate as appropriations come and go. Because of this, CDMRP awards are fully funded upfront. So you, the performer, don't have to worry about fluctuating appropriations impacting your ongoing research. If your application is recommended for funding at $500,000, you'll be getting that full $500,000 barring any performance issues on your end. Next, remember that CDMRP involves consumers and people with lived experience throughout our entire process. They are our true north and help us to ensure the research we solicit and ultimately fund is impactful for the populations we aim to serve. Impact is a major factor in our review process at both the peer and programmatic review levels, which I'll get to in a minute. And for the spinal cord injury research program, people with lived SCI experience will be reviewing your application submissions to evaluate how well your research addresses the needs of the SCI community. So to balance the needs of Congress, the consumer community, and the research landscape, CDMRP programs adapt their investment strategies on an annual basis to ensure we're addressing and responding to the most current and forward-facing stakeholder needs. This means that funding mechanisms, application requirements, and program priorities can and do change from year to year for a given program. And I'll talk when we start talking about the spinal cord injury research program about what has changed for the FY23 funding cycle. So make sure to pay close attention to those current funding opportunities and don't just assume because you applied in the past that that your research is going to be relevant to what we're asking for this year. And finally, CDMRP follows a two-tier review application process with no standing peer review panels. Panel membership is dependent upon the types of applications received for that year, and the makeup of the panels changes from year to year. This two-tier review process means that there's no pay line, and applications that receive the highest scientific scores are not automatically funded. Applications are recommended for funding based upon both their scientific merit and how well they address programmatic criteria. So let's talk about a bit more about this two-tier review process. Overall, the goal of the two-tier review process is to develop funding recommendations that balance the most meritorious science while offering the highest promise to fulfill the programmatic goals. And applications must address both of these elements to be successful. So first we have peer review, which is that first tier review. It is criteria based and evaluates individual applications on scientific and technical merit. And it's from this review that a summary statement is developed to inform the next level of review. This summary statement also gets sent to the applicants so they can better understand how their application was evaluated and, if necessary, make changes for resubmission. After scientific peer review, applications go to programmatic review, which is a comparison-based process. And during this review, scientific merit is just one of several criteria used by the programmatic panel to recommend applications to fund. The programmatic panel members compare applications against each other using programmatic review criteria. And they recommend a broad portfolio of grants that reflects the investment strategy for that particular program. The takeaway message here really is that just because your application scored well in peer review, this does not guarantee that it will be recommended for funding. It must be scientifically sound and meet the specific needs of the program. The needs of the program, our research priorities, and investment strategy are all informed by a number of stakeholders, including, and in many cases, most importantly, by consumers and people with lived experience. If you take nothing else away from this presentation today, I hope that you can appreciate how integral those with lived injury and or disease experience are to the entire CDMRP process. This slide outlines the appropriations for all of the FY23 CDMRP programs. Relevant to this audience is the Spinal Cord Injury Research Program, which is highlighted here in red, and has an FY23 appropriation of $40 million, which means that we will be funding about $37 million worth of spinal cord injury focused research this grant cycle. But what I also want to mention is that CDMRP is a huge organization. We're managing $1.52 billion this year, and we'll be executing 35 programs. SCIRP is just one of those programs, and there are a number of other programs and topic areas relevant to the SCI community that researchers may also be interested in. That being said, let's focus now on the Spinal Cord Injury Research Program. So based off of language provided by Congress, SCIRP strives to be a traumatic SCI research and treatment program with a focus on regeneration, rehabilitation, and long-term care. The vision of the program is to advance the treatment and management of spinal cord injury and ameliorate its consequences relevant to injured service members. We look to do that through encouraging interdisciplinary collaborations for the development and translation of more effective strategies and improve the health and well-being of service members, veterans, and other individuals with spinal cord injury. The SCIRP challenges the research community to advance the development or translation of healthcare solutions. Have I hit it hard enough? We're really looking for healthcare solutions here with this program. But we also allow for innovative research that fosters investigation into new areas of research. But it's important to understand that projects that solely focus on target identification are discouraged within this program. This means that although SCIRP invests across the research and development continuum, the majority of our investment focuses on translational and clinical research. We want to take those good ideas that were started with funding from other sources and provide follow-on funding to move those ideas and products closer to clinical implementation. Another important element of our investment strategy is that the SCIRP program funds across the continuum of care from time of injury throughout the lifespan, with a significant investment in topics relevant to chronic spinal cord injury. So please pay close attention to this slide as it summarizes what the SCIRP program is looking to accomplish. Our focus is on healthcare solutions and getting products closer to clinical implementation. So, and those are the types of projects that we're soliciting and aiming to fund. So an excellent place to learn more about the program is our page within the CDMRP website. And there you will find helpful information like the program strategic plan, as well as publicity materials highlighting upcoming funding opportunities, but also resources like recently funded research and a very, very helpful white paper we pulled together, circled in yellow at the bottom of this slide, which describes spinal cord injury management within the military health system to give those who may not be familiar with the unique characteristics of that setting a better idea of the capabilities and challenges of managing SCI downrange. As Jen alluded to, I'm happy to announce that SCIRP recently released the program's FY23 funding opportunities, and you can access them in a number of places, including grants.gov, eBRAP, and the CDMRP website, the link for which is included on this slide. Important dates to be aware of if you're interested in applying for SCIRP funding are noted here. The pre-application deadline for SCIRP funding is May 24th. And for CDMRP, there are two types of pre-applications. And in the case of SCIRP, we utilize a pre-proposal style of pre-application, meaning that you'll submit a 2 to 3 page high-level summary of your research project, which will be reviewed by our programmatic panel. Based upon this initial screen, the panel will extend invitations to submit full applications for projects that look to be a good fit for the program. They have high potential impact, address at least one of the focus areas, and seem to meet the intent of the funding mechanism, among other considerations. Full applications will then be due on September 7th. So for FY23, SCIRP will utilize 4 funding mechanisms: our Investigator-Initiated Research Award, Translational Research Award, the Clinical Trial Award, and a new mechanism for this year, the Clinical Translation Research Award. As you can see, each of these mechanisms solicits research within distinct domains of the research and development spectrum, and the award information section of the program announcement for each of these mechanisms will highlight types of research each mechanism is aiming to fund. We use these mechanisms because they're able to build off of one another. Our IIRA is for those early stage projects, while the TRA is aiming to move an idea or product to the next stage of development. The new mechanism, the CTRA, is for clinical research and pilot clinical trials, while the CTA is for those shovel-ready clinical trials that can be initiated immediately. We have structured this program to be a pipeline where projects can come in at any stage with the intent of advancing ideas and products closer to the clinic. And before I move on, I also want to point out that we are continuing to offer our early career partnering PI option to encourage capacity building within the SCI research community. Let's pause here and take a bit of a closer look at the CTRA mechanism, which is the new mechanism for FY23. First, this mechanism is aiming to support clinical research that may not be ready for a larger scale clinical trial and for which feasibility and pilot studies are necessary. We're looking for research that has high potential to impact the standard of care or contribute to evidence-based guidelines for SCI care and management. And there are 2 overarching goals for this mechanism. The first is to translate current and emerging techniques and interventions into the clinical space. And the second is to identify the most effective diagnosis, treatment, and rehabilitation options available to support critical decision-making for patients, clinicians, care partners, and policymakers. Applications should describe both the scientific and strategic steps the research team will take during and after the project's period of performance to advance the research to the next stage of clinical development or implementation. The scientific steps are important, but so are those strategic steps, so do not forget about them. Tell us the steps your team plans to take to move this research out of the lab and into the hands of people living with SCI. Finally, to drive research into specific program priorities, SCIRP requires that all applications to our funding opportunities address at least one of our 5 focus areas shown here, and include topics like preserving and protecting spinal cord tissue at time of injury, but also include topics like investigating psychosocial issues relevant to people with SCI, their families, and care partners. Our focus areas are developed with consultation from numerous stakeholders and reflect what the program feels are the major needs in the research landscape, while also addressing issues of high priority for those living with SCI. Other important elements to consider when applying to the SCIRP program is that we are looking to advance the treatment and management of spinal cord injury, and proposed research should demonstrate a clear path to advancing products and outcomes toward clinical implementation. We're not funding science for science sake here. Proposed research must be relevant to military health, meaning active duty service members, veterans, and other military beneficiaries. Relevance to military health is a programmatic review criteria, and so reviewers will consider it when making their recommendations about which applications to fund. I strongly encourage you to pay attention to this when developing your research project. And finally, applications should also describe the short and long-term impact of the study. Relative impact is another one of those programmatic review criteria and can be the element that makes or breaks an application. maximizing potential impact and proposing research with a high potential to lead to a practical application in the lives of people living with SCI is something that can make an otherwise, scientifically sound project stand out to the reviewers. So the potentially $1 million question, or I guess at the very least, a couple $100,000 question, how do you find out if a mechanism is right for you? Well, I would point you first to the program award mechanism synopsis. And this is a reference table that can be found in the program funding opportunities page on the CDMRP website. This is, so this is where you will find key information about the funding opportunities, like eligibility criteria, who can be named as a PI on awards within this mechanism. You'll also see key mechanism elements. This will highlight the intent of the mechanism and any specific points of consideration while you develop an idea around this funding mechanism. And finally, you will see that the funding caps and the application deadlines are included as the last column in this table. Once you have an idea about the mechanism you may want to apply to, this is when you'll want to pull out the program announcement and read through it. Unlike other funding agencies you may have experience with, program staff at the CDMRP cannot provide feedback or guidance on any aspect of your proposal. So funding opportunities are written to include everything you need to know to prepare your application. Key elements of the mechanism can be found here in the award information section of the announcement, which will detail the intent of that specific funding mechanism. Read this section first. Read this section first, because you will find out in this section if your research is applicable to the intent of the mechanism. Other important elements include the submission due dates, which are noted on the first page of the POP. And then we have the application and submission information section. And this section will include all of the application sections, or what we call attachments, and will outline the requested content for each of these attachments. Here, I have an example that includes the instructions for the impact statement and clinical translation plan attachments. So pay close attention to the language used in these instructions, because the program is asking you to address all of the elements against which your application will be reviewed. If we ask you to describe something, do it. The attachments are your opportunity to provide necessary information beyond what you would typically be requested within a project narrative, for example. Read the instructions for these attachments before you begin writing. This way, you can develop a strategy for the most efficient way to address all of the requested information and minimize redundancy. Anher incredibly important section is the application review information section, which tells you exactly what the reviewers will consider when assessing your application. I've included an example of review criteria from a recent program announcement on the right here, and this information can help you better understand what to prioritize when drafting the various elements of your application. All of this is to say that it's critical that you read the announcements before you start writing to ensure that your application meets the intent of the funding mechanism and addresses all of the necessary elements. Before we move off of this topic, I also want to highlight a few points that are new for FY23. The first point I want to make is that the definition of early career investigators that we're using for eligibility for the early career partnering principal investigator option has changed this year. Note, we've changed the eligibility to investigators with at least 3 years of research experience beyond a terminal degree, but no more than 7 years within their first faculty appointment or equivalent independent research position. This means that early career investigators can be, but do not have to be, considered independent investigators at time of submission, so long as they have at least 3 years of research experience beyond a terminal degree. Moving on, the program is prioritizing study team composition and will be requesting a description of study personnel along with any external consultants or advisors who will be providing guidance and input to the study team. For example, statisticians, regulatory experts, clinical ethicists, patient advocates. Applicants are also asked to highlight how the study team composition provides military relevant subject matter expertise to the proposed research. We've also this year updated the language for the transition plan, which hopefully will make it clearer what the program is looking to get out of that attachment. Next, in mechanisms that allow clinical trials, the program is encouraging applicants to utilize decentralized clinical trial strategies, such as virtual elements and tools for participant enrollment, communication, and data collection. And finally, if a clinical trial is proposed, applicants are asked to demonstrate that they not only have access to the proposed study population, but also provide a reasonable plan for recruitment. Given the challenges that clinical trials face in meeting enrollment and recruitment goals, this is an incredibly important element to assess the feasibility of your research study. The last thing that I want to point out for FY23 is that SCIRP will continue to require the involvement of people with lived SCI experience as part of the research team for our Translational Research Award, Clinical Translation Research Award, and Clinical Trial Award mechanisms. The program asks research teams to implement a collaborative research approach that utilizes effective and equitable collaborations with SCI community members to maximize the translational and impact potential of the proposed research. If you've applied to SCIRP in the past, we've called these community partners skills or SCI lived experience consultants. But what we've learned over the years of implementing this requirement is that there are many ways to integrate the voice of the community into research projects. And therefore, we now allow research teams to employ the collaborative research approach that best suits the proposed project. For some projects, that one-on-one consultation relationship that a skill can provide is what's needed, while other projects may want a more diverse input and will opt for something like a community advisory board. Ultimately, what the program wants is that SCIRP-funded research be responsive to the needs of people with SCI, their families, and their care partners. And we feel that by being less restrictive in how researchers and people with lived SCI experience collaborate, we can foster non-tokenistic involvement of community members within the research team. So in addition to expanding methods for engagement, the program has also provided more instruction for applicants when it comes to constructing their collaborative research plans. I'm including the specific language for this attachment, but I want to call out a few elements here, including the request for applicants to justify the collaborative research approach used. This shows the program that you've thought and considered which approach would most benefit your research project. Secondly, we ask applicants to indicate the input from the community partner that has already or will be captured and integrated into the research project. We're looking for specific examples here. As the box on the right notes, community partners are named at the time of pre-application submission. But we would expect that these community partners are contributing to the planning and execution of your research project throughout its entire lifespan. So tell us how your community partners' input has influenced your research project. We also ask you to describe training that will be provided to both scientific staff and the community partner. And finally, we want you to outline how you are going to assess the effectiveness of the collaborative research approach to ensure that it's benefiting the research so that we get more impactful products out at the end of the day. And with that, I would like to thank you for your interest in CDMRP and specifically SCIRP. And for more information, you're always welcome to visit us at our website. And I will turn it back over to Jen.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. There's a lot of great information in there. I think before we open it up to Q&A, we just wanted to share with you all a little bit more and dig a little bit deeper into developing an engagement plan for grant applications. So this very quick presentation was put together with in collaboration with the Praxis Institute, and we just wanted to kind of give you a real world example of of what you might think of in terms of designing your engagement plan and really elements to include. So part of building that plan is really understanding those who have lived experience. Remember, lived experience can not only be those who are living with spinal cord injury, but caregivers or direct family members that are living with them as well. So those can be also your partners, and focus on building that relationship with them to have them involved throughout the process. Think about the various phases that they want to be involved in, about the timelines, and also include into the budget. So as we always say, people with lived experience need to pay their mortgages as well, or pay their rent, if you will. So think about how you can build that into your budget in terms of consultation fees that you have for them, or compensation or remuneration, sometimes we call it. Also, when you think about recruiting, think about your recruitment profile. So age, gender, ethnicity, time since injury, whether you're doing, early stage spinal cord injury, or maybe it's those people living with chronic stage, maybe how they're involved in the community, what their credentials are. So think about that recruitment profile and who you would want to be choosing as your partners. Also think about the roles that they will play in terms of their duties, their time commitments, what that length of the commitment will be, and what type of tools that you're using in terms of their collaboration, and also describe and explain what that project will be. So we have a link here to our engagement guidance that's available on the NASCIC website. When we think about mapping out and thinking about a timeline, this is just one example that you might want to use in terms of where the activities take place within the timeline of your entire project. So thinking about not just the timeline, but what activities do you want those community partners to do and to give input, and for you to gain input throughout the process. So community partners are not necessarily scientists, or not trying to change the science effort, but what I always say is that it's always a good gut check to make sure that your research is being meaningful and, as Melissa said, is impactful for the community. Also think about what the activities that you want them to be involved in. How are you going to gain that type of feedback, whether it's in group sessions and individual interviews, or it's a survey of a group of people that you might have pulled together. Also think in terms of the scope of work for them. So this is just an example of a timeline for you. Thinking about budgets, we want to think about, so now that you have leveled out the timeline and the activities, really drill down into the activities of how many hours those people might need to spend, and what your partners might need to spend on, whether it's meetings, whether it's interviews, whether it's consultation, and always build in a couple of extra hours just in case you might want to do another kind of quick roundtable to make sure that your research is going into the right direction. So this is just an example of how you can help to calculate what your budget will be. We typically have some guidance in terms of how to figure out what that compensation will be. The National Health Council put out a really wonderful comprehensive calculator that is online that can help you calculate what the compensation should be. So for consultants with lived experience. So this is, again, just something I'm blowing through, I know, really quickly because we want to get to Q&A, but I think it's a good resource for you as you're building your plan for your application. Again, this is NASCIC. This is our website. You can also email us as well. And of course, if you're interested, you can go to our QR code. And as I mentioned, the resources that we have available on our website can also help give you guidance as you're putting together your application. NASCIC also has on our website something that's called project applications, and you can go in there and be able to apply for a letter of support. That goes to our project review committee. That is a committee of 10 people with lived experience. Our Vice President, Ian Burkhart, manages that project. So I will tell you, if you try to get in touch with us 24 hours before the due date, you probably will not get a response from us. But we do encourage and we do try to guarantee that if you put in an application for a letter of support, we will have it reviewed and back to you and a response to you within 3 business days. So please plan ahead if you do put a request into NASCIC for community engagement. And of course, we encourage that. We also have a database of people with lived experience who are encouraged and willing to be consultants on various types of research projects. So we can tap into that relatively quickly. So I know I blew through that very quickly, but as I mentioned, the slides, not only from what Dr. Melissa Miller presented, as well as the slides that I just presented, will be available with the recording. So now we want to open it up to you. Here's your open door to ask Melissa questions about applying for some clarity or ask her anything that has to do with the SCIRP program. So we can either do this, if you would like to speak your question, please use the raised hand feature in Zoom, or you can put your question into chat and we can bring that into the fold. So I wanted to open it up for everyone, but let me start with a couple of questions for you, Melissa. So
can I just make a comment first before you start, Jen?
Absolutely.
Since this is since we're waiting on people to make comments. You mentioned about budgeting for community partners' time, and I know that has we've received a number of questions from potential applicants about whether that is an allowable cost for DoD funded awards. And I want to let everyone know, yes, that absolutely is an allowable cost. If that is something that you want to use SCIRP funding for to pay your consultants, absolutely, definitely do that. That is allowable.
Thank you for mentioning that. And to dovetail on that, we have a bit of a quirky system in the US, and some people cannot take direct remunerations. So we have guidance. We worked with the PVA, and we have guidance on our website in terms of other ways to compensate people for their time. But again, it's something that you can budget, but understanding that we have to fit the needs of everyone within our community. So thanks for mentioning that, Melissa. Any questions that we might have out there so far? Okay, I'm going to start.
I just got a secret question, a direct message, but I think it's good to share with the whole group. I won't name names. But I just got a question about whether there's a rubric or a checklist for application attachments to make sure that you're not missing something as you're pulling your application materials together. And I want to let everyone know that we actually include a table at the end of our program announcements, letting you know what all of the attachments are, including all of the budget materials, bio sketches, and we leave space for you to actually make physical check marks if you want to. The EBRAP website and grants.gov will also have something similar, but this might be satisfying to have a physical check.
I know that would help me, definitely. Thanks for answering that, Melissa. Yeah. Anastasia, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, my name is Anastasia Keller. Good to see you, Dr. Miller, and thank you so much for organizing this. This is very great and helpful. I'm a researcher at University of California, San Francisco, and we have submitted an application last year, and it was reviewed pretty favorably. We got an alternate status. So my question is regarding what is your sense or recommendation? Because in the letter that we got, it's stating that the funds are not available at the moment, and that it may be till September that we wait to see if there's anything opens up. So given that we we looked at the summary statement, the reviewer comments are very addressable. So we are planning on resubmitting the grant. So is that your recommendation that we go ahead and submit a new letter of intent for FY 2023 in this case?
Yeah, so to answer your question about alternate status, one, yeah, we probably won't know until midsummer if we're going to have funds to be able to support additional projects. Usually those funds don't magically appear. It's usually something bad happens to one of the projects that we've recommended for funding. And so it's low likelihood that something that's on the alternate list will get pulled up. However, this should not stop you from applying for the open funding opportunities now. We just released them. And since you did so well last year, and it sounds like both the peer reviewers and the programmatic reviewers liked it, yes, you absolutely should. I would absolutely recommend that you apply again, making sure that, your project is still within the focus areas and intent of the mechanisms that we have. But one thing that I like to remind applicants, especially applicants that are considering sort of resubmitting to CDMRP, is that CDMRP doesn't have a sort of resubmission process, and because it's the people that reviewed your application last year likely will not be the same people reviewing your application this year. What that allows you to do is tailor how you respond to that summary statement. You don't need to, please don't go point by point and address every single weakness that the reviewers identified. Pick the ones that you believe will help your project be stronger and make a stronger application from that. You're not trying to address someone's ego here. You're trying to make the strongest application possible.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. That's good to know. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. There's a question in the chat that asks from Barry that asks what led to the decision to have people with lived experience as part of the grant application mandated, and do you have any advice for funders that want to follow your lead?
Yeah, so I feel this is a loaded question, Barry. So as many of you likely know, CDMRP was established by people with lived experience, by breast cancer survivors. That's why CDMRP exists. And so advocates and people with lived experience have been a part of the CDMRP process, our review and investment strategy processes since our beginning, since the 90s. But what the SCIRP programmatic panel identified was that there were weaknesses in the applications that we were receiving that could be addressed by simply having people with that lived experience working together with researchers to make the projects stronger, to make the questions that the researchers were asking more impactful for those living with spinal cord injury. And it really came from our panel, the program manager that was here before me, to really push to fill that gap. And we're doing it. The applications that we're getting are very, very strong. And my favorite part about this whole thing is that our applicants are going above and beyond our baseline requirements for engagement, meaning that they're engaging more folks with lived SCI experience than what we are requiring them for. We need to have some type of, baseline requirement, but they're going beyond just checking the box and actively engaging more people to get more diverse integration of thought and people with lived experience.
Excellent. Thanks, Melissa. We have another question in the chat. Nathan asks, should we mention in the LOI or in the application that the application is a resubmission?
You don't need to. That's a waste of space, honestly. Yeah, don't bother. It's not going to help you. It's not going to hurt you. Or it could hurt you by giving you one less line or whatnot. So it's not necessary.
Okay, great. Thank
Got
you.
it. Can I follow up another question? I mean,
Sure.
I think it's very informational. I think I really like the idea of including the community. People who have lived in experience. So I'm based in North Carolina. I'm just curious, how do we recruit people who have lived in experience? And actually, we also have participants with SCI who actually work with us. Especially, I work in exoskeletons, and we recruit them. So is it okay? We have them as in our proposal. Of course, they will be participants, but I'm not sure as a collaborator to give us feedback. I guess that's the whole idea, is to give how this is going and give constant feedback. Can they be added, or I need to add someone more experienced and lived in experience, something like that, I guess.
Melissa, you want to address it, and then I'll chime in.
I can. So I wanna make sure to sort of say that there is a line between a partner, a community partner, and a research participant.
Okay.
And they're doing sort of two different jobs. Could a community partner be a participant in your research? Potentially. But for example, when we are soliciting folks to participate on our programmatic panel and our peer review panels, we're looking for folks who can speak to a more broader experience than just their own. Not that that's bad, but we're looking for broader experience and not just that one-off. This is what's happening to me. We want someone with a broader engagement. That may not be necessarily true for your experiment, but go ahead, Jen.
Sure.
Yeah, and to dovetail that, we at NASCIC, we usually go by the FDA guidance. They have guidance on patient engagement, and they have a very clear definition between a clinical trial participant and an advisor with lived experience. So we typically follow that definition, which is very similar, almost exactly the same as what Melissa just described. So how do you find these people? So there's a couple of resources, but I am going to point you to a couple of places. One is our SCI research advocacy course. We do have a module near the end that is for researchers that really, and the final module as well is how to partner with people in the community. And it gives you some great resources in there in that module. And again, that's for free and available on our website. We also, through NASCIC, you can put in a letter of support to tap into people with lived experience as advisors. There's other organizations that offer that as well, such as the PVA. The PVA has several members that want to be advisors on research projects, as well as an organization called Unite to Fight Paralysis. They also have a program for placing people. So that can give you another means of being able to attract those. If you are in the Carolinas, there is a Carolina chapter for the United Spinal Association, and you can go onto their website and contact their chapter if you want people that are local to you rather than remotely. That's another way of being able to attract those. And also the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation have something called the Ambassador Program, and they have ambassadors as well that are willing to be advisors. So there's lots of people in the community to tap into and to be able to reach out and find those advisors for your program.
All right, thank you.
Sure. We do have another question in the chat, Melissa. Does the SCIRP allow multi-PI grant applications?
Fantastic question. So for our mechanisms, all of our 4 mechanisms have a secondary option. So our base mechanisms, all 4 of them, are single PI projects. Okay, single PI mechanisms. However, you can execute the option for an early career partnering PI investigator option. And this will restructure the project to be a multi-PI project. And in this way, we will have each of these partners, including the early career investigator, will get their own award to work towards that central problem together. Okay. So does SCIRP allow for multi-PI applications? Absolutely. If you want both of those PIs to have their own award, then you would have to go under that early career partnering PI option.
Jennifer, did you want to ask a follow-on question?
Yeah, could I ask a follow-up question? Thanks so much for that information, Melissa. That was really great. My question specifically is, if the co-PI that I'm considering applying with, if we're at the same career level, would that work? Even though, you know, there wouldn't be a true like mentor-mentee relationship there. That was my question.
So are you concerned that both of the faculty that would be applying would be quote unquote considered early career?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. There is nothing wrong with that. And the reason why I say that is because the purpose of this mechanism is not for mentorship. This is not a career development award. It is an opportunity to bring, to I guess, force funding into the hands of early career investigators.
Encourage.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that clarification. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. I have a question for you, Melissa. Actually, I have a couple of questions, but this is one that's always burning because there's a new mechanism for under the SCIRP program called the Clinical Translational Research Award. Now, you mentioned that pilot project or pilot studies are allowed in that. However, when you read the TRA, the Translational Research Award, there's pilot studies allowed in that as well. Can you help to differentiate or help kind of the members of our audience differentiate where maybe their project would sit and what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. I tried to make a flow chart for this, but the flow chart was more confusing than just explaining it. Actually, there's a really great graphic on the SCIRP webpage that I encourage everyone to go to. But sort of where the bounds are, okay? If your research involves animals, if you're proposing animal research, you would fall into the IIRA or the TRA, okay? Even if you are involving, you're proposing an animal study as aim 1 and a clinical trial as aim 3, that's still a TRA. Where the difference comes with that new mechanism, that CTRA, is that CTRA is only for clinical research and can fund clinical trials. So if you're proposing observational human subjects research or a pilot clinical trial, you would go under that CTRA because you would not be necessarily eligible if you're proposing a pilot clinical trial the only thing that you're proposing under that TRA mechanism. And then if you're proposing a much larger clinical trial or a clinical trial that can't be done with 1.25 million, you have to have that $3 million. That's where you would go to that CTA mechanism.
Okay, great. That's a great way to clarify it. Thank you. Thank you. Neetan, is it Neetan or Nighton? I have you have another question in the chat. Would you like to unmute and ask that?
Sure. Yeah, well, actually, this is, I submitted my DoD SCIRP application last year. I got feedback. I mean, it got some nice review comments. I was curious, like, is there a direct way to talk to the program manager and get any other feedback? I just don't know how to contact them. I mean, is that possible or is not possible?
Yeah, so CDMRP staff is not allowed to provide you feedback on your individual research project, right?
Okay.
So unlike other funding agencies where you sort of have a, you know, like a almost like a consultant role with the program officer, the program staff here at CDMRP cannot provide you that feedback. We are certainly willing to help you if you have questions about the program announcements, if you have specific questions about your summary statement that you might want clarification on. If you're confused about whether your project is even a good fit for the program, you absolutely can reach out to us. And the way that you would do that is either if it's a technical question, like I don't understand this part of the program announcement, you would go to the eBRAP help desk, or if it's a question about fit or questions about your summary statement, then you would go to our public affairs officer. We have a public affairs mailbox that you would email, and that's how sort of everyone could get in contact with a program manager at CDMRP. However, because I'm here, you could just ask Jen to send along my email. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to put it in the public space because the DoD is protective of us. But Jen can certainly pass along my contact information, and we can have an offline conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Is
Thank you.
that my hint, Melissa, to put that in the chat? Oh, okay. Nope, I know you can't tell me.
I can't stop you from putting my email in the chat.
Let's put it that way, right? Exactly. Are there any other questions out there? Because I do have a couple of other questions for you, Melissa, just for clarification. So this is this is under the DoD. Are investigators or applications required to have a VA partner or required to have somebody with military experience in their application?
That's a fantastic question. I actually, in the slide deck that you all will receive, you'll have a backup slide that addresses this. And essentially the answer is no, you are not required to partner with the VA, the active duty researchers, a military treatment facility, or even engage a military population. However, all research that CDMRP funds, including SCIRP projects, must be relevant to military health, and that can look, very differently from project to project, but is something that all of our applicants must consider: is how is their research going to be relevant to military health? One easy way is by engaging a VA partner or a military treatment facility. But that's not always the case. There are lots of ways your research can be relevant to military health.
Excellent, great. That's really helpful, Melissa. We have about 1 minute left. Any other questions out there? All right, I'm going to ask one more question. My one more question is, there's lots of focus areas that you focus on. There's mainly 5, right? Mm-hmm. Could you touch on a little bit about psychosocial, because that seems like a big bucket, but if you can kind of address some of the intent and what the program is looking for.
Yeah, sure. Psychosocial is a huge bucket. You're absolutely right. And in fact, it's so large that the program has identified areas that we are particularly interested in funding. And we've included those areas in the program announcements under our focus areas section in the program announcement. So so potential applicants can read that. But they include areas that our stakeholders have identified are important to them. Self-management, depression, anxiety, intimacy. All of these topics are relevant to living well with spinal cord injury and are fall under our umbrella of psychosocial effects that are relevant to spinal cord injury. Also note that as you mentioned, Jen, we're focused on people living with an injury, but also their family members and care partners who are impacted by spinal cord injury as well. Research engaging them, focused on them, also can fall within the umbrella of SCIRP-funded research.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So we want to close out this session by thanking you all for attending, and we appreciate your questions today. We want to thank Dr. Melissa Miller for her time and for presenting about the program and really having a great program for spinal cord injury research. I did put a couple of resources that we mentioned during this session into the chat, so please feel free to touch on some of those resources. And of course, if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to our members at NASCIC. And I know Melissa is willing to help out as well, as much as she is able to within the program. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you for your interest. Again, a link to this recording will be available. So if your colleagues were not able to attend, please share. And also the slides from the session will also be available with the recording. So again, this ends our session. We appreciate you all attending. We appreciate your interest in spinal cord injury research, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, everyone.